How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Pei Gimel, Daf 83 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, today we finish the 8th parak of Masechta Menachos. We continue in the middle of our discussion from yesterday. Towards the end of the Daf yesterday, there was a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. Right. So Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer, because we had a Mishnah. And in our Mishnah, we had a limud that the pasuk is talking about by Korbin Pesach. Of course, it's Pesach now. The pasuk is talking about the Korbin Pesach, and it talks about cows. Cows, Korbin Pesach, makes no sense. So what we learned from there is to compare all other korbanos to Korbin Pesach, that just like Korbin Pesach needs to be from Chulin. Can't be Meiser Sheni or anything like that. It has to be from Chulin. So all korbanos, when you have an obligation to bring a korban, it has to be from Chulin. The Gemara then started discussing how do we know that the Korbin Pesach has to be from Chulin, and there was machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer was trying to learn it out from either Pesach in Mitzrayim or from a limud from the pasuk says Avoda Azos B'chodesh Hazeh. Rabbi Akiva did not agree with those approaches. So now what we're up to now in the Gemara is Rabbi Akiva Pesach De'enu Ba Elam Nachulin Menolis. And how does Rabbi Akiva know this? Because Rabbi Akiva also agrees that Korbin Pesach has to be from Chulin. So how does he know this? And this is essentially the focus of our daf together today. Friends, we're going to begin on daf Pei Beis Amid Beis, about 10 or 15 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Akiva Pesach De'enu Ba Elam Nachulin Menolis. Yeah. That how does Rabbi Akiva know that the Korbin Pesach has to come from Chulin? Nafkale Moda Omer Shmuel Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. There is a brisa. There's a brisa. And in this brisa, Shmuel darshans in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, the pasuk that says, I'm going to read you the pasuk, this is from last week's parsha as well, parsha Tzab. Zo satere la'ola. We've seen this before. La mincha, v'la chatos, v'la oshim, v'la milurim, v'la zevach hashlamim. What did we just list? 6 different types of korbanos. And why does it pasuk list all these korbanos? After all, it says we already have different psukim. Zos toras hachatos, zos toras hashlamim, etc., etc. Why we reiterate v'zos toras, zos haTorah, la'ola, la mincha, v'la chatos, etc. Why do we need to do this? Rather, it's because we're making limu drushes from all of these different types of korbanos in the pasuk. Now, Rabbi Shmuel is going to quote different drushes from Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva is going to disagree with those drushes and then provide his own, from that, okay. Rabbi Akiva is going to give his own mahalach. Right now we're going to start with Rabbi Eliezer's mahalach. Rabbi Akiva is going to give his own mahalach, from where we're going to see how he knows that korbanos need to be chulin, and we will then proceed through the daf that way. So, says the Gemara to Amar Shmuel Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Shmuel says the name of Rabbi Eliezer. Zos haTorah la'ola. This is the Torah for the ola. V'la mincha v'la chatos. V'la osham v'la miluim. V'la zevach hashlam. Ola. What do we learn from ola? Ma'ola tuna kli avkoton kli. Just like a korban ola requires a vessel, so too all korbanos require vessels. Ma'i, what vessel are we talking about? Ilim, mizrok. Maybe it's talking about the vessel that the dam is received in. The Kabbalah Sadam is received in a mizrok. Maybe all korbanos need mizroks, and then we learn that from ola. But that is not unique to the burnt offering. That is not unique to the Korban Ola. After all, by Zivchei Shalmei Tzibor, we also know about Mizroks. The pasuk says, Vayosim Ba'agonis. Before Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights to receive the luchos, the tablets. So it says there that a big mizbeach was set up at the foot of Har Sinai, the base of Har Sinai, and 12 matzevas, 12 stones, one for each of the tribes of Israel. And it says there that the Na'arim, Do we have the pasuk over here? I don't know that we do. That the Nari B'nai Yisrael. Oh, great. We have the pasuk here. Vayishlach as Nari B'nai Yisrael. That Moshe Rabbeinu sent the Nari B'nai Yisrael, the lads of B'nai Yisrael, Rashi on the pasuk, and as we learned in Masechta Zevachim, that is a reference to the Bechorim, right? The last parak of Masechta Zevachim, we learned in the Mishnayos over there, that until the Mishkan, the Avoda was with the Bechors, and the Bechors, they vayalu olis, they offered olis, vayizbechu zvachim shlomim lashim parim, and they offered shlomim, and it says vayikach Moshe chatzi adam vayosim ba'agonis, v'chatzi adam zorak al mizbeach, and it says over there that the blood was received in these agonis, in these vessels. So we know not just about Korbin Ola, but also Korbin Shlom, we already know about these vessels. So Ela Sakin, rather the knife. V'ola Gufim Nolan, how do you know that a Korbin Ola requires a knife? The pasuk says by Takeres Yitzchak. Vayishlach Avram es Yodoi, vayikach zamacheles lishcha des beno. That Avram Avinu reached for the knife to slaughter his yingul. V'osam Olahu, and over there, and that was the Korbin Ola dichsib vayaleu leola tachas beno. That instead he used the knife not for his yingul, not for his son, but for the ram that was ne'echaz besvach bekarnoi, and he used the knife in order to slaughter the ram. And that was an ola. So we see that an ola requires a knife, and we learn from ola that all korbanos require a knife. Mincha. What do we learn from mincha? Ma mincha eina ne'echeles el zichrei kuna. Who eats a korban mincha? Korban mincha is kodesh kodashim. Kodesh kodashim. Who eats that? The male priests. Avkol eina ne'echolen el zichrei kuna. All, I guess it means all, probably all kodesh kodashim are only eaten by male priests. Okay, now what are we talking about? Ichatas v'ashom be'edger ksiv. Now, the thing is, we already have psukim that already tell us chatas is only to be eaten by zichrei kuna. Same thing for asham, we have psukim by asham as well. Iziv resham v'tzibur merbuye dekrayasi. And if we're talking about zivchei sham v'tzibur, which is basically the only other option, right? Because the Korbin Ola, of course, nobody's eating. And we're saying we already have psukim explicitly for the chatas and the ashram. And even when it comes to zivchei shalmit tzibur, which are shalmit tzibur are kachim as well, it's learned out from bekodesh kodashim tochalenu kol zachar yochal also. That when the pasuk says that pasuk in Bamidbar says that bekodesh kodashim tochalenu is talking about the matnos kahuna, the things that the kohanim eat, and it says there it has to be eaten in the azar. Now, what's it talking about? We already have psukim by chatas, we already have psukim by ashram. So what's it talking about? So limit al zivchei shalmit tzibur she'ein echolem el zichrei kuna, and it teaches that the zivchei shalmit tzibur are only eaten by the zichrei kuna, by the male priests. New. So then, what do we need to learn from Ola? We already know from other places. The chatas it says explicitly, ashram it says explicitly that these korbanos need to be eaten by zichrei kuna. And we have this other pasuk that comes to include zivchei shalmit tzibur. So what do we need Ola for? Tanoi yitztaka machlokas tanaim b'ika d'maisi l'miyachav v'ika d'maisi l'malcha. Look, Rabbi Eliezer learns the zichrei kuna by the zivchei shalmit tzibur from here, from Mincha. But there are others who learn it, in fact, from that pasuk in Bamidbar. Chatas. What do we learn out from chatas? Machatas mikadsha balua. A chatas. If any other meat comes into, or any other foods, I imagine, comes into contact, although it's going to be in the kodesh, but I guess any foods that come into contact with, or any other korbanos that come into contact with a korban chatas, it takes on the characteristic of a korban chatas, which means we'll treat it like kachim kachim. And if the korban chatas is pasul, then that other meat will be pasul as well. And this applies to all, right? We apply this not just to chatas, but to all korbanos. That whenever you have a korban that comes into contact with any other korbanos or any other food, so we now have to treat them like that korban, right? Like the stringency of that korban. So I imagine this would even apply to chulin and like a shlamim or something. You take it home to eat your shlamim, it comes into contact with some kind of chulin, so it has to be treated like a shlamim, right? You'd only have the amount of time that you have to eat the shlamim, to eat whatever touched it. And if the korban was pasul, well, then this would be pasul as well. The same thing if chatas comes into contact with shlamim or whatever. So we have to treat it like the more stringent one, and if it's pasul, then whatever got touched is also now pasul. So Av Kol Makacha B'Valua, this applies to all korbanos. Asham, what do we learn from Asham? Asham, Ein Shvir V'Shilya Kadosh Bo. Now here's the thing about a korban Asham. A korban Asham is male. Korban Asham is male. Korban Asham doesn't have a fetus. A korban Asham is never going to have a amniotic sac. It's a male. So Memele, Ma'ashim ain't shvir v'shil kadosh bo. So Memele, you're never gonna slaughter a korban asham and find that there is a fetus or an amniotic sac inside of it, and therefore Memele it's not kadosh. Avko ain't shvir v'shil kadosh bo. So also all korbanos, even female korbanos like a chatos, for example, if you slaughter it and it turns out that there is a fetus in there or an amniotic sac, it is not going to be kadosh. Kasover Vlado Valos Kachim Bavyason in Kadoshin, because Rabbi Eliezer holds that korbanis offspring only are holy once they are born. When they are still inside of the mother, they are not yet holy, and therefore, when slaughtering, let's say a korban chatas, and it turns out there's a fetus, that fetus will not yet be kadosh. It's only kadosh once it's born. And v'dan efsher mishi efsher. We learn out things that are possible from things that are impossible. This was Rabbi Eliezer's shita yesterday as well when it came to Korbin to Pesach Mitzrayim, where he said that it's offered from Chulin, even though of course it was offered from Chulin, there was no other option in Mitzrayim. So here also, of course the asham is going to be, there won't be any issues of fetuses because it's male, but nonetheless, we could still learn to other korbanos that can be female, that their fetuses, if they exist, if you slaughter the animal, it turns out there's a fetus, it will not be kadosh. Miluim, and what we learned from the miluim is miluim mosrein bisreifa. When it came to the korbanos by the miluim that we learned about in last week's parsha, any leftovers from the miluim, any leftover meat would be burnt ve'ein by lechaim mosrein bisreifa. There wasn't any live animals left over there. It was only meat that was left over there. Av kol mosrein bisreifa ve'ein by lechaim mosrein bisreifa. Also, when we talk about all korbanos, that when there are leftovers, whether it's meat that is left over past the amount of time that you have to eat it, so we're going to say that would be noser, and that would have to be burnt. However, if, for example, you set aside an extra korban la'achrayas, just in case something happens to the first animal, that would not require strafe or anything like that. We talked about the other day that it can go and graze. Okay. Shlamim, what do we learn from shlamim? Shlamim mifaglin u'mispaglin. Shlamim can be mifagel. For example, if you have machshavas chutz lizmano by a korban shlamim, so not only is the korban itself going to be pigel, but also it's mifagel the nesachim. The nesachim are also pigel. If you drink the wine or whatever of the nisuch hayayin, you will be chayiv kares for pigel. I've called mifaglin u'mispaglin, and therefore that applies not just to shlamim, but to all korbanis. Masnisa Tana B'Shmei Rabbi Akiva. Now Rabbi Akiva, however, learns this pasuk differently. The things that he learns out from this pasuk are a little bit different. Zos HaTorah v'chulei mincha. What does Rabbi Akiva learn out from mincha? Ma mincha mikadeshes bibalua. Avkol mikadeshes bibalua. That Rabbi Akiva learns out from mincha that if if anything absorbs from a mincha, it takes on the stringencies of mincha in terms of kachim, and if it's possible, then whatever it touches will be possible, and that applies to other korbanos as well. Now we had learned this in Rabbi Eliezer's version from chatos, that chatos is mekadesh b'balua. So we're saying that the Torah had to write by chatos as well as by mincha. Right, that anything that touches it will be like it. The cause of Achmana b'mincha, because if we only had the pasuk by mincha, mishum dirakicha baloa, because a mincha is softer. I guess the mincha can absorb, but maybe also other things will absorb from. I think it's talking about the mincha itself would absorb, and I guess they were saying that just like a mincha can absorb, so anything that absorbs from a mincha would also have the stringencies of the mincha. Aval chatos emelo, but maybe a chatos would. This halacha of absorbing wouldn't apply to chatas, which is not as soft. Because of achmana b'chatas, and if we only had the pasuk by chatas, mishum the basar agav the shamin kader. Well, meat, however, there's fat, and because there's fat, maybe the whatever it comes in contact can get absorbed in it, and therefore we had to write. So I might think so. Aval mincha emalo. I might think that maybe a mincha, this concept of absorbing, would not apply to the mincha in the same way because it doesn't have that fat. We need both the mincha and the chatos to teach us this halacha of absorbing. We wouldn't necessarily know one without the other. Chatos, what do we learn from chatos? And this is the kicker. This is the kicker. This is the kicker. This is the kicker right here. The kicker. Chatos machatos eina ba ela min chulin. Chatos needs to come from chulin. Uvayom, and it's offered during the day. Uvayado ayimanis, and you use your right hand when applying the blood to the mizbech. Afkol eino ba ela min chulin. All korbanos have to come from chulin. Of course, that includes Korbin Pesach. It includes all korbanos need to come from chulin. Uvayom, and they are offered during the day. Uvayado ayimanis, and using the coin's right hand. V'chadas gufa minalin hadin chatas has to be offered from chulin. The pasuk says vikra v'harin es parachatos asher lo. It says by Yom Kippur that Aharon a kohen would offer his chatas cow. Mishalo, it's his. Velo mishel meiser, not from meiser sheni. It has to be chulin. Now, for the Gemara, bayom mibiyom savosu nafka. 1 second. Bayom, the fact that the korban chatas has to be offered during the day, and that other korbanos are learned from there. No, it's learned out from a different pasuk, from Bayom Tzavoso. What was it? It says, Asher Tziva Hashem es Moshe ba'asina Bayom Tzavoso es Bnei Yisrael lahakiv es korbanim. Hashem b'asina. So all korbanos have to be during the day. That's where that's learned out from. Kedin Azbe say, yeah, you're talking right. We didn't need to mention the daytime here by the chatas. Bildo Ayimanis midu bar chana nafko. The bar chana Amr Shlakish. Say 1 second, and the fact that you have to use your right hand, that's not learned out from chatas, it's learned out from Mabba B'chana Dim V'Shlakish that we've seen before as well. Kol makom shenemar etzba v'kuna enu ela yamin, that whenever the pasuk says etzba, a finger, and kahuna as well, whenever something has those two elements of, if it says etzba, finger, and it also says kahuna, priesthood, it means to use your right hand. So once again, Kedin Azba, you're right. It is learned out from there. Any place that says finger and coin, the right hand is required, and it did not need to be in this list. So when we say that from chatos, we learn out that it needs to come from chulin, and we learn out that it needs to be offered during the day, and we learn out that the right hand must be used. The truth is, you could drop the right hand, you could drop the day, but we do learn out from chatos that it needs to come from chulin, and that is our Rabbi Akiva knows that all korbanos need to come from chulin. Asham, and what do we learn out from Asham finally? Ma Asham atzmos of mutarin, Havkal atzmos of mutarin. Just like by a korban Asham, the meat is allowed to the Kohanim, and also the bones are allowed. The bone, I believe, without any of the marrow in it, but the bones, just the bones themselves, are permitted. So too, other korbanos as well, the bones would be permitted. Rashi points out even a korban ola, which is entirely burnt, the bones would be mutar into the Kohanim. Now, Givaldik. So that is how Rabbi Akiva learns out that all korbanos need to come from chulin, including the Korbin Pesach. Rabbi Akiva Hai v'zavachta Pesach my overlay. Now, in our Mishnah, we had learned out from the pasuk of v'zavachta Pesach l'Hashem leikecha tzon uvaker. They offer Korbin Pesach sheep as well as cows. And we said, Mapitom, Korbin Pesach is not cows, it's sheep, goats from the flock, not cows. So we learned from there that, well, all korbanos that can come from cows, they have to be chulin, just like the Korbin Pesach is chulin. But Rabbi Akiva learned out the chulin requirement from this other pasuk of Zos Torah, la mincha, la chatzis, etc. So what does Rabbi Akiva learn from this pasuk? The boy of Nachman. It's like Rav Nachman says in the name of Rabbi Barvua, Minayin lemoser ha-pesach shekorev shlomim. How do we know that leftover Korbin Pesachs are offered as Korbin Shlomims? Right? For example, maybe if you set aside money to buy a Korbin Pesach and you find a bargain and you have leftover money, so that could be offered as a Shlomim. Alternatively, if maybe one gets lost, so you set aside a different one and you find the original one, right? So there are scenarios where you can have a leftover Korbin Pesach, or if you push it, just were unable to offer it or whatever. So you have a leftover Korbin Pesach, it's offered as a Korbin Shlomin. Shenema, as the pasuk says, V'zavachta Pesach l'Hashem lekecha tzon uvaker, that you will slaughter a Korbin Pesach to the Rebbeinu Shalom, flock and cattle. V'alo ein Pesach ba elam min hakvasim u'min ha'izim. One second, but Pesach, Korbin Pesach is sheep, goats, not cattle. What we're learning from there is that whenever you have a leftovers by a Korbin Pesach, whenever you have leftovers by a Korbin Pesach, that it's not the time, it's outside of the window of offering the Korbin Pesach. What do you do with the Pesach? What do you do with the Korbin Pesach outside of the window of offering the Korbin Pesach? After all, of course, we know it's a very small window, a few hours in the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan. So, you offer it as something that's offered from tzon and bakar, from flock and cattle, i.e., it would be offered as a Korbin Shlom. One second. But this concept of Moser Pesach Karev Shlomim is learnt out from Avur Deshmur. The pasuk says, "V'im min atzon korban lezevach shlomim." The pasuk in the 3rd chapter of the book of Leviticus that's talking about Korbin Shlomim, it says that if a sheep will be offered, if from the flock is a Korbin Shlomim. Now the thing is, it doesn't have to say Korban lezevach Shlomim. It doesn't have to mention Zevach Shlomim because it's already talking about Zevach Shlomim. So I don't need to mention Zevach Shlomim. It's extra. From Avur Deshmur darshans from there, that when it says Ve'im min atzon Korban lezevach Shlomim, it means that something that comes from the tzon. What comes from the tzon? Korbin Pesach. Yehei lezevach Shlomim, when it's outside of the window of offering the Korbin Pesach, it's offered as a Shlom. One second. This concept of Moser Pesach Karev Shlomim is learned from a 3rd place. Tisani, we learned in the Brisa, Keves, that when the pasuk says by Korbin Shlomim, you see, it starts talking about I believe, if I'm not mistaken, what pasuk is this? Pasuk Zayin. I don't remember if it starts talking about cattle. I'd have to look up the pasuk, but it's already talking about Shlomim, and then it talks about, I believe it even says Keves in the previous. I have the previous pasuk here, right? Yeah, what's the previous? V'im min atzon korban lezevach shlom l'Hashem. The very next pasuk says im kesef u'makrib. If it's a sheep. The thing is, after that, it starts talking about goats. So I don't really need it to say that if it comes from the sheep, because it already mentioned flock, and after this comes the goats. So what's it talking about before then if it's flock that isn't goat? Memele, it's sheep. I don't need it to say sheep. So the Rabbi says, a Pesach, why does it say sheep? It's coming to include, right? Keves, the Rabbi says, a Pesach, la'aliyah. It's called, what we're learning up from Keves is it's not necessary. It's extra to teach us that the Korbin Pesach is offered together with its fatty tail. That the fatty tail, that the fatty tail is offered on the Mizbeach when it comes to the Korbin Pesach. Kishu Omer im Keves, and when it says the word im Keves, the word im is extra. Lahavi Pesach Shavash Naso, to include a Pesach that Shavash Naso, Korbin Pesach has to be within its 1st year. If it gets too old, V'shlam Maboy Machmas Pesach, or the Shalmei, the Chagigas Yudalit. If there were a lot of people at the Seder, Baruch Hashem was at a gorgeous Pesach Seder the other night. Thank God there were 13 of us. 13 of us. It could be that one Korbin Pesach maybe would have been sufficient for 13 of us. I don't know. But just in case we needed extra, so there would be a Korbin Shlam, a Chagigas Yudalid, to have some extra meat, so that by the time it's time for the Korbin Pesach, it'll be ala sova, we'll all be full, and that'll be like a dessert. So so whether we're talking about Pesach Shavash Nasa, whether we're talking about a Korbin Pesach that is too old now, can't be offered as a Korbin Pesach anymore, or the Chagigas Yudalid, that it should be treated like a Korbin Shlamim, Sheyitanu Smicha, that you lean on it, V'nesachim and Minchas Nesachim, Nisuchayayin, Betnufas Chazav Ashok, and you wave around the breast and the thigh. And when it says ve'im eiz, so that's an interruption. Limed ala she'ena tunalya, that the goat does not require the fatty tail. The fatty tail of the goat is not burnt on the mizbeach, only of the sheep. No. So it's lasa kroi. So we just listed 3 psukim that teach us that essentially Moser Pesach Karev Shlomim. That when you have a leftover Pesach, maybe it got too old, maybe for whatever reason you missed the window, it's offered as a Korbin Shlomim from 3 different psukim. Chad, the Avizmanu Vravashna. So one teaches us about if the window to offer the Korbin Pesach has closed, and also the animal is too old. So not only is the animal too old, but also the window to offer the Korbin Pesach is closed. So this animal is totally out. The second pasuk teaches us about if the window has closed, but it's still within that first year. It still technically could be a kosher Korbin Pesach. And the third pasuk teaches us about a situation where it's still, the window to offer Korbin Pesach has not yet closed, and it's still within its first year. So mamish, like this is straight up Korbin Pesach material. And nonetheless, in all 3 of these cases, it can be offered as a Korbin Shlomim. We need all 3 cases, the Ashminon of Rizmano Vravashnaso, because if we had the case of when the window to offer the Korbin Pesach has closed, and Vravashnaso, the animal is too old, so like it's totally not shaykh to Korbin Pesach anymore. The window to offer the Korbin Pesach is closed. The animal is too old. So mishum the idche lelegam, because it's completely not relevant anymore to Korbin Pesach. That is why it can be offered as a Korbin Shlom Aval of a Zman of Lavish Naso. However, if the window to offer the Korbin Pesach is closed, but the animal itself is still within its first year, the Chazil Pesach Sheni, you can use it for Pesach Sheni. Emelo, I might think that maybe you can't simply offer it right now as a Shlom. So we have to say, no, even in that case, you can still offer it as a Shlom V'yashminon, Avra Zmano, V'lo Avra Shnoso. And if it taught, okay, the situation of the window is closed, but it's still within the first year, okay, so we're saying it can be offered as a Korbin Shlom, because at the end of the day, the window for Pesach Rishon is closed. So you can offer it as a Korbin Shlom. Avol, lo Avra Zmano, V'lo Avra Shnoso. But if the window to offer a Korbin Pesach has not closed, and it is still within its first year, i.e., it's before the time, right? It's not yet time to offer the Korbin Pesach. It's the 13th of Nisan or whatever. Maybe on that day I can't offer it as a Korbin Shlomim on the 13th of Nisan. Wait one day and offer it the next day as a Korbin Pesach. Aim Allah would say that maybe you can't offer it as a Shlomim, and if you do, maybe it should be possible. You should wait to offer it the next day as a Korbin Pesach. Tzricha, we have to say, even in that case, you have mamish, a perfectly good sheep that can be offered as a Korbin Pesach. It's within its first year. The time to offer the Korbin Pesach has not yet closed, meaning wait till tomorrow and offer it. Nonetheless, if you offer it today as a Korbin Shlom, it's kosher. Hadron Oloch Hatoda Isabah Chever. That was the 8th parak of Masechta Menachos and the 83rd daf of Masechta Menachos. And Daf Pei Gimel of Masechta Menachos, really, the main thrust of the daf was to understand how Rabbi Akiva knows that all korbanos need to come from Chulin. Now, this came essentially from the pasuk of Zos Torah la'ola la'mincha v'lachatas v'la'ashim v'la'biluim v'zevach. Each item in that, each element in that pasuk taught us something else generally about korbanos. Rabbi Eliezer had one approach for what we learned from all these different korbanos. Rabbi Akiva had his own approach, and in his approach from the chatas, it teaches that just like a chatas has to be offered from Chulin, so all korbanos need to be offered from Chulin. That is how Rabbi Akiva knows it. We then went back and said, okay, so what does Rabbi Akiva learn from the pasuk of that talks about Bakr by Korbin Pesach? So he says that is to teach that Moser HaPesach Korib Shlomin. Friends, that was Daf Pei Gimel, Daf 83 of Masechta Menachos, and that was the 8th chapter of Masechta Menachos. Join me tomorrow, and we will begin the 9th chapter of Masechta Menachos. Cheers.